Day 4, the third story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philippa Javins. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 4, the third story. 3 young men love 3 sisters and flee with them to Crete. The eldest of the sisters slays her lover for jealousy. The second saves the life of the first by yielding herself to the Duke of Crete. Her lover slays her and makes off with the first. The third sister and her lover are charged with murder, are arrested and confess the crime. They escape death by bribing the guards, flee destitute to Rhodes, and there in destitution die.
Pompinea's story ended, Philostrato mused awhile, and then said to her, "A little good matter there was that pleased me at the close of your story, but, before it was reached, there was far too much to laugh at, which I could have wished had not been there." Then, turning to Lauretta, he said, "Madam, give us something better to follow, if so it may be." Lauretta replied with a laugh, "Harsh beyond measure are you to the lovers, to desire that their end be always evil. But, as in duty bound, I will tell a story of 3, who all alike came to a bad end, having had little joyance of their loves." And so saying, she began.
Well may ye wot, young ladies, for 'tis abundantly manifest, that there is no vice but most grievous disaster may ensue thereon to him that practises it, and not seldom to others. And of all vices, that which hurries us into peril with loosest rein is, methinks, anger, which is naught but a rash and hasty impulse, prompted by a feeling of pain, which banishes reason, shrouds the eyes of the mind in thick darkness, and sets the soul ablaze with a fierce frenzy. Which, though it not seldom befall men, and one rather than another, has nevertheless been observed to be fraught in women with more disastrous consequences, inasmuch as in them the flame is both more readily kindled, and burns more brightly, and with less impediment to its vehemence. Wherein is no cause to marvel, for if we consider it, we shall see that 'tis of the nature of fire to lay hold more readily of things light and delicate than of matters of firmer and more solid substance. And sure it is that we, without offence to the men be it spoken, are more delicate than they, and much more mobile. Wherefore, seeing how prone we are thereto by nature, and considering also our gentleness and tenderness, how soothing and consolatory they are to the men with whom we consort, and that thus this madness of wrath is fraught with grievous annoy and peril. Therefore, that with stouter heart we may defend ourselves against it, I purpose by my story to show you how the loves of 3 young men and as many ladies, as I said before, were by the anger of one of the ladies changed from a happy to a most woeful complexion. Marseilles, as you know, is situate on the coast of Provence, a city ancient and most famous, and in old time the seat of many more rich men and great merchants than are to be seen there today, among whom was one Narnald Clouada by name, a man of the lowest origin, but a merchant of unsullied probity and integrity, and boundless wealth in lands and goods and money, who had by his lady several children, 3 of them being daughters, older each of them than the other children, who were sons. 2 of the daughters, who were twins, were, when my story begins, 15 years old, and the third was but a year younger, so that in order to their marriage their kinsfolk awaited nothing but the return of Narnald from Spain, whither he was gone with his merchandise. One of the twins was called Ninette, the other Madeleine, the third daughter's name was Berthelle. A young man, Restagnon by name, who, though poor, was of gentle blood, was in the last degree enamoured of Ninette, and she of him, and so discreetly had they managed the affair, that never another soul in the world witting aught of it, they had had joyance of their love, and that for a good while, when it so befell that 2 young friends of theirs, the one Foulque, the other Hugues by name, whom their fathers, recently dead, had left very wealthy, fell in love, the one with Madeleine, the other with Berthelle. Whereof Restagnon, being apprised by Ninette, bethought him that in their love he might find a means to the relief of his necessities. He accordingly consorted freely and familiarly with them, accompanying now one, now the other, and sometimes both of them, when they went to visit their ladies and his; and when he judged that he had made his footing as friendly and familiar as need was, he bade them one day to his house, and said, "Comrades most dear, our friendship, perchance, may not have left you without assurance of the great love I bear you, and that for you I would do even as much as for myself. Wherefore, loving you thus much, I purpose to impart to you that which is in my mind, that in regard thereof you and I together may then resolve in such sort as to you shall seem the best. You, if I may trust your words, as also what I seem to have gathered from your demeanour, by day and night burn with an exceeding great love for the two ladies whom you affect, as I for their sister. For the assuagement whereof, I have good hope that if you will unite with me, I shall find means most sweet and delightsome, to wit, on this wise. You possess, as I do not, great wealth. Now, if you are willing to make of your wealth a common stock with me as third partner therein, and to choose some part of the world where we may live in careless ease upon our substance, without any manner of doubt, I trust so to prevail that the three sisters, with great part of their father's substance, shall come to live with us, wherever we shall see fit to go, whereby each with his own lady we shall live as three brethren, the happiest men in the world. 'Tis now for you to determine whether you will embrace this proffered solace, or let it slip from you." The two young men, whose love was beyond all measure fervent, spared themselves the trouble of deliberation. 'Twas enough that they heard that they were to have their ladies; wherefore they answered, that, so this should ensue, they were ready to do as he proposed. Having thus their answer, Restagnon, a few days later, was closeted with Ninette, to whom 'twas a matter of no small difficulty for him to get access. Nor had he been long with her before he adverted to what had passed between him and the young men, and sought to commend the project to her, for reasons not a few. Little need, however, had he to urge her, for to live their life openly together was the very thing she desired, far more than he; wherefore she frankly answered that she would have it so, that her sisters would do, more especially in this matter, just as she wished, and that he should lose no time in making all the needful arrangements. So Restagnon returned to the two young men, who were most urgent that it should be done even as he said, and told them that on the part of the ladies the matter was concluded. And so, having fixed upon Crete for their destination, and sold some estates that they had, giving out that they were minded to go a trading with the proceeds, they converted all else that they possessed into money, and bought a brigantine, which with all secrecy they handsomely equipped, anxiously expecting the time of their departure; while Ninette, on her part, knowing well how her sisters were affected, did so by sweet converse foment their desire, that till it should be accomplished they accounted their life as naught. The night of their embarkation being come, the three sisters opened a great chest that belonged to their father, and took out therefrom a vast quantity of money and jewels, with which they all three issued forth of the house in dead silence, as they had been charged, and found there three lovers awaiting them, who, having forthwith brought them aboard the brigantine, bade the rowers give way, and tarrying nowhere, arrived the next evening at Genoa, where the new lovers had for the first time joyance and solace of their love. Having taken what they needed of refreshment, they resumed their course, touching at this port and that, and in less than 8 days, speeding without impediment, were come to Crete. There they bought them domains both beautiful and broad, whereon, hard by Candia, they built them mansions most goodly and delightsome, wherein they lived as barons, keeping a crowd of retainers, with dogs, hawks, and horses, and speeding the time with their ladies in feasting and revelling and merrymaking, none so light-hearted as they. Such being the tenor of their life, it so befell that, as 'tis matter of daily experience, that however delightful a thing may be, superabundance thereof will breed disgust, Restagnon, much as he had loved Ninette, being now able to have his joyance of her without stint or restraint, began to weary of her, and by consequence to abate somewhat of his love for her. And being mightily pleased with a fair gentlewoman of the country, whom he met at a merrymaking, he set his heart upon her, and began to show himself marvellously courteous and gallant towards her. which Ninette perceiving, grew so jealous, that he might not go a step but she knew of it, and resented it to his torment and her own with high words. But as, while superfluity engenders disgust, appetite is but whetted when fruit is forbidden, so Ninette's wrath added fuel to the flame of Restagnon's new love. And whichever was the event, whether in course of time Restagnon had the lady's favour or had it not, Ninette, whoever may have brought her the tidings, firmly believed that he had it; whereby from the depths of distress she passed into a towering passion, and thus was transported into such a frenzy of rage, that all the love she bore to Restagnon was converted into bitter hatred, and, blinded by her wrath, she made up her mind to avenge by Restagnon's death the dishonour which she deemed that he had done her. So she had recourse to an old Greek woman that was very skilful in compounding poisons, whom by promises and gifts she induced to distil a deadly water, which, keeping her own counsel, she herself gave Restagnon to drink one evening, when he was somewhat heated and quite off his guard; whereby, such was the efficacy of the water, she dispatched Restagnon before matins. On learning of his death, Foulques and Hugues and their ladies, who knew not that he had been poisoned, united their bitter with Ninette's feigned lamentations, and gave him honourable sepulture. But so it befell, that not many days after, the old woman that had compounded the poison for Ninette was taken for another crime, and, being put to the torture, confessed the compounding of the poison among other of her misdeeds, and fully declared what had thereby come to pass. Wherefore the Duke of Crete, breathing no word of his intent, came privily by night, and set a guard around Foulques's palace, where Ninette then was, and quietly and quite unopposed took and carried her off, and, without putting her to torture, learned from her in a trice all that he sought to know touching the death of Restagnon. Foulques and Hugues had learned privily of the Duke, and their ladies of them, for what cause Ninette was taken, and being mightily distressed thereby, bestirred themselves with all zeal to save Ninette from the fire to which they apprehended she would be condemned, as having indeed richly deserved it. But all their endeavours seemed to avail nothing, for the Duke was unwaveringly resolved that justice should be done. Madeleine, Foulques's fair wife, who had long been courted by the Duke, but had never deigned to show him the least favour, thinking that by yielding herself to his will she might redeem her sister from the fire, dispatched a trusty envoy to him with the intimation that she was entirely at his disposal, upon the twofold condition, that in the first place her sister should be restored to her free and scatheless, and in the second place the affair should be kept secret. Albeit gratified by this overture, the Duke was long in doubt whether he should accept it. In the end, however, he made up his mind to do so, and signified his approval to the envoy. Then, with the lady's consent, he put Foulques and Hugues under arrest for a night, as if he were minded to examine them of the affair, and meanwhile courted himself privily with Madeleine. Ninette, who, he had made believe, had been set in a sack and was to be sunk in the sea that same night, he took with him, and presented her to her sister in requital of the night's joyance, which, as he parted from her on the morrow, he prayed her might not be the last, as it was the first fruit of their love, at the same time enjoining her to send the guilty lady away, that she might not bring reproach upon him, nor he be compelled to deal rigorously with her again. Released the same morning, and told that Ninette had been cast into the sea, Foulques and Hugues, fully believing that so it was, came home, thinking how they should console their ladies for the death of their sister; but, though Madeleine was at great pains to conceal Ninette, Foulques, nevertheless, to his no small amazement, discovered that she was there, which at once excited his suspicion, for he knew that the Duke had been enamoured of Madeleine, and he asked her how it was that Ninette was there. Madeleine made up a long story by way of explanation, to which his sagacity gave little credit, and in the end, after long parley, he constrained her to tell the truth. Whereupon, overcome with grief and transported with rage, he drew his sword, and, deaf to her appeal for mercy, slew her. Then, fearing the vengeful justice of the Duke, he left the dead body in the room, and hied him to Ninette, and with a counterfeit gladsome mien said to her, "Go we without delay whither thy sister has appointed that I escort thee, that thou fall not again into the hands of the Duke." Ninette believed him, and being fain to go for very fear, she forwent further leave taking of her sister, more particularly as it was now night, and set out with Fouque, who took with him such little money as he could lay his hands upon, and so they made their way to the coast, where they got aboard a bark, but none ever knew where their voyage ended. Madeline's dead body being discovered next day, certain evil disposed folk, that bore a grudge to Hugues, forthwith apprised the Duke of the fact, which brought the Duke, for much he loved Madeline, in hot haste to the house, where he arrested Hugues and his lady, who as yet knew nothing of the departure of Fouque and Ninette, and extorted from them a confession that they and Fouque were jointly answerable for Madeline's death. For which cause, being justly apprehensive of death, they with great address corrupted the guards that had charge of them, giving them a sum of money which they kept concealed in their house against occasions of need, and together with the guards fled with all speed, leaving all that they possessed behind them, and took ship by night for Rhodes, where, being arrived, they lived in great poverty and misery no long time. Such then was the issue to which Restagnon by his foolish love, and Ninette by her wrath, brought themselves and others. End of Day 4, the third story.
Day 4, the fourth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 4, the fourth story. Gerbino, in breach of the plighted faith of his grandfather, King Guglielmo, attacks a ship of the King of Tunis to rescue thence his daughter. She being slain by those aboard the ship, he slays them, and afterwards he is beheaded.
Lauretta, her story ended, kept silence, and the king brooded as in deep thought, while one or another of the company deplored the sad fate of this or the other of the lovers, or censured Ninette's wrath, or made some other comment. At length, however, the king roused himself, and raising his head, made sign to Elisa that was now for her to speak. So modestly Elisa thus began.
Gracious ladies, not a few there are that believe that love loses no shafts save when he is kindled by the eyes, contemning their opinion that hold that passion may be engendered by words, whose error will be abundantly manifest in a story which I purpose to tell you, wherein you may see how mere rumor not only wrought mutual love in those that had never seen one another, but also brought both to a miserable death. Guglielmo the second, as the Sicilians compute King of Sicily, had two children, a son named Ruggeri and a daughter named Costanza. Ruggeri died before his father, and left a son named Gerbino, who, being carefully trained by his grandfather, grew up a most goodly gallant, and of great renown in court and camp, and that not only within the borders of Sicily, but in divers other parts of the world, among them Barbary, then tributary to the King of Sicily. And among others, to whose ears was wafted the bruit of Gerbino's magnificent prowess and courtesy, was a daughter of the King of Tunis, who, by averment of all that had seen her, was a creature as fair and debonair, and of as great and noble a spirit as nature ever formed. To hear tell of brave men was her delight, and what she heard, now from one, now from another, of the brave deeds of Gerbino, she treasured him in her mind so sedulously, and pondered them with such pleasure, rehearsing them to herself in imagination, that she became hotly enamored of him, and there was none of whom she talked, or heard others talk, so gladly. Nor, on the other hand, had the fame of her incomparable beauty and other excellences failed to travel, as to other lands, so also to Sicily, where, falling on Zerbino's ears, it gave him no small delight, to such effect that he burned for the lady no less vehemently than she for him. Wherefore, until such time as he might, upon some worthy occasion, have his grandfather's leave to go to Tunis, yearning beyond measure to see her, he charged every friend of his that went thither to give her to know, as best he might, his great and secret love for her, and to bring him tidings of her; which office one of the said friends discharged with no small address; for, having obtained access to her, after the manner of merchants, by bringing jewels for her to look at, he fully apprised her of Zerbino's passion, and placed him and all that he possessed entirely at her disposal. The lady received both messenger and message with gladsome mien, made answer that she loved with equal ardour, and in token thereof sent Zerbino one of her most precious jewels. Zerbino received the jewel with extreme delight, and sent her many a letter and many a most precious gift by the hand of the same messenger, and 'twas well understood between them that, should fortune accord him opportunity, he should see and know her. Of this footing the affair remained somewhat longer than was expedient, and so, while Zerbino and the lady burned with mutual love, it befell that the king of Tunis gave her in marriage to the king of Granada, whereat she was wroth beyond measure, for that she was not only going into a country remote from her lover, but, as she deemed, was severed from him altogether. And so this might not come to pass, gladly, could she but have seen how, would she have left her father and fled to Zerbino. In like manner Zerbino, on learning of the marriage, was vexed beyond measure, and was ofttimes minded, could he but find means to win to her husband by sea, to wrest her from him by force. Some rumor of Zerbino's love and of his intent reached the king of Tunis, who, knowing his prowess and power, took alarm, and as the time drew nigh for conveying the lady to Granada, sent word of his purpose to King Guglielmo, and craved his assurance that it might be carried into effect without let or hindrance on the part of Zerbino or anyone else. The old king had heard nothing of Zerbino's love affair, and never dreaming that 'twas on such account that the assurance was craved, granted it without demur, and in pledge thereof sent the king of Tunis his glove; which received, the king made ready a great and goodly ship in the port of Carthage, and equipped her with all things meet for those that were to man her, and with all appointments apt and seemly for the reception of his daughter, and awaited only fair weather to send her therein to Granada. All which the young lady seeing and marking, sent one of her servants privily to Palermo, bidding him greet the illustrious Zerbino on her part, and tell him that a few days would see her on her way to Granada; wherefore 'twould now appear whether or no he were really as doughty a man as he was reputed, and loved her as much as he had so often protested. The servant did not fail to deliver her message exactly, and returned to Tunis, leaving Zerbino, who knew that his grandfather King Guglielmo had given the king of Tunis the desired assurance, at a loss how to act. But prompted by love, and goaded by the lady's words, and loath to seem a craven, he hied him to Messina, and having there armed 2 light galleys, and manned them with good men and true, he put to sea and stood for Sardinia, deeming that the lady's ship must pass that way. Nor was he far out in his reckoning, for he had not been there many days when the ship sped by a light breeze, hove in sight not far from the place where he lay in wait for her. Whereupon Zerbino said to his comrades, "Gentlemen, if you be as good men and true as I deem you, there is none of you but must have felt, if he feel not now, the might of love. For without love I deem no mortal capable of true worth or aught that is good. And if you are or have been in love, 'twill be easy for you to understand that which I desire. I love, and 'tis because I love that I have laid this travail upon you. And that which I love is in the ship that you see before you, which is fraught not only with my beloved, but with immense treasures, which, if you are good men and true, we, so we but play the man in fight, may with little trouble make our own. Nor for my share of the spoils of the victory demand I aught but a lady, whose love it is that prompts me to take arms. All else I freely cede to you from this very hour. Forward then! Attack we this ship, success should be ours, for God favors our enterprise, nor lends her wind to evade us." Fewer words might have sufficed the illustrious Zerbino, for the rapacious Messenices that were with him were already bent heart and soul upon that to which by his harangue he sought to animate them. So when he was done, they raised a mighty shout, so that 'twas as if trumpets did blare, and cut up their arms, and smiting the water with their oars, overhauled the ship. The advancing galleys were observed while they were yet a great way off by the ship's crew, who not being able to avoid the combat, put themselves in a posture of defense. Arrived at close quarters, the illustrious Zerbino bade send the ship's masters aboard the galleys, unless they were minded to do battle. Certified of the challenge, and who they were that made it, the Saracens answered that 'twas in breach of the faith plighted to them by their assailant's king that they were thus attacked, and in token thereof displayed King Guglielmo's glove, averring in set terms that there should be no surrender either of themselves or of aught that was aboard the ship without battle. Zerbino, who had observed the lady standing on the ship's poop, and seen that she was far more beautiful than he had imagined, burned with a yet fiercer flame than before, and to the display of the glove made answer that, as he had no falcons there just then, the glove booted him not; wherefore, so they were not minded to surrender the lady, let them prepare to receive battle. Whereupon, without further delay, the battle began on both sides with a furious discharge of arrows and stones, on which wise it was long protracted to their common loss, until at last Zerbino, seeing that he gained little advantage, took a light bark which they had brought from Sardinia, and having fired her, bore down with her, and both the galleys, upon the ship. Whereupon the Saracens, seeing that they must perforce surrender the ship or die, caused the king's daughter, who lay beneath the deck weeping, to come up on deck, and led her to the prow, and shouting to Zerbino, while the lady shrieked alternately mercy and succor, opened her veins before his eyes, and cast her into the sea, saying, "Take her, we give her to thee on such wise as we can, and as thy faith has merited." Maddened to witness this deed of barbarism, Zerbino, as if courting death, recked no more of the arrows and the stones, but drew alongside the ship, and, despite the resistance of her crew, boarded her, and as a famished lion ravens amongst a herd of oxen, and tearing and rending, now one, now another, gluts his wrath before he appears his hunger, so Zerbino, sword in hand, hacking and hewing on all sides among the Saracens, did ruthlessly slaughter not a few of them, till, as the burning ship began to blaze more fiercely, he bade the seamen take thereout all that they might by way of guerdon, which done, he quitted her, having gained but a rueful victory over his adversaries. His next care was to recover from the sea the body of the fair lady, whom long and with many a tear he mourned. And so he returned to Sicily and gave the body honorable sepulture in Ustica, an islet that faces, as it were, Trapani, and went home the saddest man alive. When these tidings reached the king of Tunis, he sent to King Guglielmo ambassadors, habited in black, who made complaint of the breach of faith, and recited the manner of its occurrence, which caused King Guglielmo no small chagrin, and seeing not how he might refuse the justice they demanded, he had Gerbino arrested, and he himself, none of his barons being able by any entreaty to turn him from his purpose, sentenced him to forfeit his head, and had it severed from his body in his presence, preferring to suffer the loss of his only grandson than to gain the reputation of a faithless king. And so miserably, within the compass of a few brief days, died the two lovers by woeful deaths, as I have told you, and without having known any joyance of their love. End of Day 4, the 4th story.
The fifth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J.C. Guan. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 4. The fifth story. Lisabetta's brothers slay her lover. He appears to her in a dream, and shows her where he is buried. She privately disinters the head, and sets it in a pot of basil, whereupon she daily weeps a great while. The pot being taken from her by her brothers, she dies not long after.
Elisa's story ended, the king bestowed a few words of praise upon it, and then laid the burden of discourse upon Philomela, who, full of compassion for the woes of Gerbino and his lady, heaved a piteous sigh, and thus began.
My story, gracious ladies, will not be of folk of so high a rank as those of whom Elisa has told us, but perchance 'twill not be less touching. 'Tis brought to my mind by the recent mention of Messina, where the matter befell. Know then that there were at Messina 3 young men, that were brothers and merchants, who were left very rich on the death of their father, who was of San Gimignano. And they had a sister, Lisabetta by name, a girl fair enough, and no less debonair, but whom, for some reason or another, they had not as yet bestowed in marriage. The 3 brothers had also in their shop a young paysan, Lorenzo by name, who managed all their affairs, and who was so goodly of person and gallant that Lisabetta bestowed many a glance upon him, and began to regard him with extraordinary favour, which Lorenzo, marking from time to time, gave up all his other amours, and in like manner began to affect her, and so, their loves being equal, 'twas not long before they took heart of grace, and did that which each most desired; wherein, continuing to their no small mutual solace and delight, they neglected to order it with due secrecy, whereby one night, as Lisabetta was going to Lorenzo's room, she, all unwittingly, was observed by the eldest of the brothers, who, albeit much distressed by what he had learned, yet, being a young man of discretion, was swayed by considerations more seemly, and, allowing no word to escape, spent the night in turning the affair over in his mind in divers ways. On the morning he told his brothers that which, touching Lisabetta and Lorenzo, he had observed in the night, which, that no shame might thence ensue either to them or to their sister, they after long consultation determined to pass over in silence, making as if they had seen or heard naught thereof, until such time as they in a safe and convenient manner might banish this disgrace from their sight before it could go further. Adhering to which purpose, they jested and laughed with Lorenzo, as they had been wont, and after a while, pretending that they were all 3 going forth of the city on pleasure, they took Lorenzo with them, and being come to a remote and very lonely spot, seeing that 'twas apt for their design, they took Lorenzo, who was completely off his guard, and slew him, and buried him on such wise that none was ware of it. On their return to Messina, they gave out that they had sent him away on business, which was readily believed, because 'twas what they had been frequently used to do. But as Lorenzo did not return, and Lisabetta questioned the brothers about him with great frequency and urgency, being sorely grieved by his long absence, it so befell that one day, when she was very pressing in their enquiries, one of the brothers said, "What means this? What means this? What hast thou to do with Lorenzo, that thou shouldst ask about him so often? Ask us no more, or we will give thee such answer as thou deservest." So the girl, sick at heart and sorrowful, fearing she knew not what, asked no questions, but many a time at night she called piteously to him, and besought him to come to her, and bewailed his long tarrying with many a tear, and ever yearning for his return, languished in total dejection. But so it was, that one night, when, after long weeping that her Lorenzo came not back, she had at last fallen asleep, Lorenzo appeared to her in a dream, wan and in utter disarray, his clothes torn to shreds and sodden, and thus, as she thought, he spoke: "Lisabetta, thou dost not but call me, and vex thyself for my long tarrying, and bitterly upbraid me with thy tears, wherefore be it known to thee that return to thee I may not, because the last day that thou didst see me, thy brother slew me." After which he described the place where they had buried him, told her to call and expect him no more, and vanished. The girl then awoke, and doubting not that the vision was true, wept bitterly, and when morning came, and she was risen, not daring to say aught to her brothers, she resolved to go to the place indicated in the vision, and see if what she had dreamed were even as it appeared to her. So, having leave to go a little way out of the city for recreation in company of a maid that had at one time lived with them and knew all that she did, she hied her thither with all speed, and having removed the dry leaves that were strewn about the place, she began to dig where the earth seemed least hard. Nor had she dug long before she found the body of her hapless lover, whereon as yet there was no trace of corruption or decay, and thus she saw without any manner of doubt that her vision was true. And so, saddest of women, knowing that she might not bewail him there, she would gladly, if she could, have carried away the body and given it more honourable sepulture elsewhere. But as she might not do so, she took a knife, and, as best she could, severed the head from the trunk, and wrapped it in a napkin, and laid it in the lap of her maid, and having covered the rest of the corpse with earth, she left the spot, having been seen by none, and went home. There she shut herself up in her room with the head, and kissed it 1,000 times in every part, and wept long and bitterly over it, till she had bathed it in her tears. She then wrapped it in a piece of fine cloth, and set it in a large and beautiful pot of the sort in which marjoram or basil is planted, and covered it with earth, and therein planted some roots of the goodliest basil of Salerno, and drenched them only with her tears, or water perfumed with roses or orange blossoms. And 'twas her wont ever to sit beside this pot, and all her soul one yearning, to pour upon it, as that which enshrined her Lorenzo, and when long time she had so done, she would bend over it, and weep a great while, until the basil was quite bathed in her tears. Fostered with such constant unremitting care, and nourished by the richness given to the soil by the decaying head that lay therein, the basil burgeoned out in exceeding great beauty and fragrance. And the girl persevering ever in this way of life, the neighbours from time to time took note of it, and when her brothers marvelled to see her beauty ruined, and her eyes as it were evanished from her head, they told them of it, saying, "We have observed that such is her daily wont." Whereupon the brothers, marking her behaviour, chid her therefore once or twice, and as she heeded them not, caused the pot to be taken privily from her, which, so soon as she missed it, she demanded with the utmost instance and insistence, and, as they gave it not back to her, ceased not to wail and weep, insomuch as she fell sick, nor in her sickness craved she aught but the pot of basil. Whereat the young men, marvelling mightily, resolved to see what the pot might contain, and having removed the earth they espied the cloth, and therein the head, which was not yet so decayed, but that by the curled locks they knew it for Lorenzo's head. Passing strange they found it, and fearing lest it should be bruited abroad, they buried the head, and, with as little said as might be, took order of their privy departure from Messina, and hied them thence to Naples. The girl ceased not to weep and crave her pot, and so weeping died. Such was the end of her disastrous love, but not a few in course of time coming to know the truth of the affair, there was one that made the song that is still sung, to wit: A thief he was, I swear, a sorry Christian he, that took my basil of Salerno fair, etc. End of Day 4, the 5th story.
The 6th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eugene Smith. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 4, the 6th story. Andreula loves Galeotto. She tells him a dream that she has had. He tells her a dream of his own, and dies suddenly in her arms. While she and her Maya are carrying his corpse to his house, they are taken by the Signory. She tells how the matter stands, is threatened with violence by the Podestà, but will not brook it. Her father hears how she is bested, and her innocence being established, causes her to be set at large. But she, being minded to tarry no longer in the world, becomes a nun.
Glad indeed were the ladies to have heard Philomena's story, for that, often though they had heard the song sung, they had never yet, for all their inquiries, been able to learn the occasion upon which it was made. Where it was ended, Pamphilo received the king's command to follow suit, and thus spoke.
By the dream told in the foregoing story, I am prompted to relate one in which two dreams are told, dreams of that which was to come, as Lisabetta's was of that which had been, and which were both fulfilled almost as soon as they were told by those that had dreamed them. Wherefore, loving ladies, you must know that 'tis the common experience of mankind to have diverse visions during sleep, and albeit the sleeper, while he sleeps, deems all alike most true, but being awake, judges some of them to be true, others to be probable, and others again to be quite devoid of truth. Yet not a few are found to have come to pass. For which cause many are as sure of every dream as of aught that they see in their waking hours, and so, as their dreams engender in them fear or hope, or sorrowful or joyous. And on the other hand, there are those that credit no dream, until they see themselves fallen into the very peril whereof they were forewarned. Of whom I approve neither sort, for in sooth neither are all dreams true, nor all alike false. That they are not all true, there is none of us but may many a time have proved, and that they are not all alike false has already been shown in Philomena's story, and shall also, as I said before, be shown in mine. Wherefore I deem that in a virtuous course of life and conduct there is no need to fear aught by reason of any dream that is contrary thereto, or on that account to give up any just design. And as for crooked and sinister enterprises, however dreams may seem to favour them, and flatter the hopes of the dreamer with auspicious omens, none should trust them. Rather should all give full credence to such as run counter thereto. But come we to the story. In the city of Brescia There lived of yore a gentleman named Messer Negro da Ponte Carraro, who, with other children, had a very fair daughter, Andriola by name, who, being unmarried, chanced to fall in love with a neighbour, one Gabriotto, a man of low degree, but goodly of person and debonair, and endowed with all admirable qualities. And, aided and abetted by the housemaid, the girl not only brought it to pass that Gabriotto knew that he was beloved of her, but that many a time, to their mutual delight, he came to see her in a fair garden belonging to her father, and that naught but death might avail to sever them from this their gladsome love, they became privily man and wife. And while thus they continued their clandestine intercourse, it happened that one night, while the girl slept, she saw herself in a dream in her garden with Gabriotto, who, to the exceeding great delight of both, held her in his arms. And while thus they lay, she saw issue from his body, somewhat dark and frightful, the shape whereof she might not discern, which, as she thought, laid hold of Gabriotto, and in her despite with prodigious force reft him from her embrace, and bore him with it underground, so that both were lost to her sight for evermore. Whereby stricken with sore and inexpressible grief, she awoke, and albeit she was overjoyed to find that 'twas not as she had dreamed, yet a haunting dread of what she had seen in her vision entered her soul. Wherefore, Gabriotto being minded to visit her on the ensuing night, she did her best endeavour to dissuade him from coming, but seeing that he was bent upon it, lest he should suspect somewhat, she received him in her garden, where, having culled roses many, white and red, for 'twas summer, she sat herself down with him at the base of a most fair and lucent fountain. There long and joyously they dallied, and then Gabriotto asked her wherefore she had that day forbade his coming, whereupon the lady told him her dream of the night before, and the doubt and fear which it had engendered in her mind, whereat Gabriotto laughed, and said that 'twas the height of folly to put any faith in dreams, for that they were occasioned by too much or too little food, and were daily seen to be, one and all, things of naught, adding, "Were I minded to give heed to dreams, I should not be here now, for I too had a dream last night, which was on this wise. Methought I was in a fair and pleasant wood, and there, a hunting, caught a she-goat as beautiful and lovable as any that ever was seen, and, as it seemed to me, whiter than snow, which in a little while grew so tame and friendly that she never stirred from my side. All the same, so jealous was I lest she should leave me, that, meseemed, I had set a collar of gold around her neck, and held her by a golden chain. And presently meseemed that, while the she-goat lay at rest with her head in my lap, there came forth, I know not whence, a greyhound bitch, black as coal, famished, and most fearsome to look upon, which made straight for me, and for, meseemed, I offered no resistance, set her muzzle to my breast on the left side, and gnawed through to the heart, which, meseemed, she tore out to carry away with her. Whereupon ensued so sore a pain that it brake my sleep, and as I awoke, I laid my hand to my side to feel if aught were amiss there. But finding nothing, I laughed at myself that I had searched. But what signifies it all? Visions of the like sort, ay, and far more appalling, have I had plenty, and naught whatever, great or small, has come of any of them. So let it pass, and think we how we may speed the time merrily. What she heard immensely enhanced the already great dread which her own dream had inspired in the girl, but, not to vex Gabriotto, she dissembled her terror as best she might. But though she made great cheer, embracing and kissing him, and receiving his embraces and kisses, yet she felt a doubt, she knew not why, and many a time, more than her wont, she would gaze upon his face, and ever and anon her glance would stray through the garden to see if any black creature were coming from any quarter. While thus they passed the time, of a sudden Galeotto heaved a great sigh, and embracing her said, "Alas, my soul, thy succour, for I die." And so saying, he fell down upon the grassy mead. Whereupon the girl drew him to her, and laid him on her lap, and all but wept, and said, "O sweet my lord, what is it that ails thee?" But Galeotto was silent, and gasping sore for breath, and bathed in sweat, in no long time departed this life. How grievous was the distress of the girl, who loved him more than herself, you, my ladies, may well imagine. With many a tear she mourned him, and many times she vainly called him by his name. But when, having felt his body all over, and found it cold in every part, she could no longer doubt that he was dead, knowing not what to say or do, she went, tearful and woebegone, to call the maid to whom she had confided her love, and showed her the woeful calamity that had befallen her. Piteously awhile they wept together over the dead face of Galeotto, and then the girl said to the maid, "Now that God has reft him from me, I have no mind to linger in this life, but before I slay myself, I would we might find apt means to preserve my honour and the secret of our love, and to bury the body from which the sweet soul has fled." "My daughter," said the maid, "speak not of slaying thyself, for so wouldst thou lose in the other world also him that thou hast lost here, seeing that thou wouldst go to hell, whither, sure I am, his soul is not gone, for a good youth he was. Far better were it to put on a cheerful courage, and bethink thee to succour his soul with thy prayers or pious works, if perchance he have need thereof by reason of any sin that he may have committed. We can bury him readily enough in this garden, nor will anyone ever know, for none knows that we ever came hither, and if thou wilt not have it so, we can bear him forth of the garden, and leave him there, and on the morrow he will be found, and carried home, and buried by his kinsfolk." The girl, heavy laden though she was with anguish, and still weeping, yet gave ear to the counsels of her maid, and rejecting the former alternative, made answer to the latter on this wise: "Now God forbid that a youth so dear, whom I have so loved and made my husband, should with my consent be buried like a dog, or left out there in the street. He has had my tears, and so far as I may avail, he shall have the tears of his kinsfolk, and already wot I what we must do." And forthwith she sent the maid for a piece of silken cloth which she had in one of her boxes, and when the maid returned with it, they spread it on the ground and laid Galeotto's body thereon, resting the head upon a pillow. She then closed the eyes and mouth, shedding the while many a tear, wove for him a wreath of roses, and strewed upon him all the roses that he and she had gathered. Which done, she said to the maid, "'Tis but a short way hence to the door of his house, so thither we will bear him, thou and I, thus as we might have dight him, and will lay him at the door. Day will soon dawn, and they will take him up, and, though 'twill be no consolation to them, I, in whose arms he died, shall be glad of it." So saying, she burst once more into a torrent of tears, and fell with her face upon the face of the dead, and so long time she wept. Then, yielding at last to the urgency of her maid, for day was drawing nigh, she arose, drew from her finger the ring with which she had been wedded to Galeotto, and set it on his finger, saying with tears, "Dear my lord, if thy soul be witness of my tears, or if, when the spirit is fled, aught of intelligence or sense shall lurk in the body, graciously receive the last gift of her whom in life thou didst so dearly love." Which said, she swooned, and fell upon the corpse. But, coming after a while to herself, she arose, and then she and her maid took the cloth whereon the body lay, and so bearing it, quitted the garden, and bent their steps towards the dead man's house. As thus they went, it chanced that certain of the Podesta's guard, that for some reason or other were abroad at that hour, met them, and arrested them with the corpse. Andreola, to whom death was more welcome than life, no sooner knew them for the officers of the Signory, and she frankly said, "I know you, who you are, and that flight would avail me nothing. I am ready to come with you before the Signory, and to tell all there is to tell. But let none of you presume to touch me, so long as I obey you, or to take away aught that is on this body, if he would not that I accuse him." And so, none venturing to lay hand upon either her person or the corpse, she entered the palace. As soon as the Podestà was apprised of the affair, he arose, had her brought into his room, and there made himself conversant with the circumstances. And certain physicians being charged to inquire whether the good man had met his death by poison or otherwise, all with one accord averred that 'twas not by poison, but that he was choked by the bursting of an imposthume near the heart. Which when the Podestà heard, perceiving that the girl's guilt could be but slight, he sought to make a pretence of giving what it was not lawful for him to sell her, and told her that he would set her at liberty, so she were consenting to pleasure him. But finding that he did but waste his words, he cast aside all decency, and would have used force. Whereupon Andreola, kindling with scorn, waxed exceeding brave, and defended herself with a virile energy, and with high and contumelious words drove him from her. When 'twas broad day, the affair reached the ears of Messer Negro, who, half dead with grief, hied him with not a few of his friends to the palace, where, having heard all that Podestà had to say, he required him peremptorily to give him back his daughter. The Podestà, being minded rather to be his own accuser, than that he should be accused by the girl of the violence that he had meditated towards her, began by praising her and her constancy, and in proof thereof went on to tell what he had done. He ended by saying that, marking her admirable firmness, he had fallen mightily in love with her, and so, notwithstanding she had been wedded to a man of low degree, he would, if 'twere agreeable to her and to her father, Messer Negro, gladly make her his wife. While they thus spoke, Andreola made her appearance, and, weeping, threw herself at her father's feet, saying, "My father, I wot I need not tell you the story of my presumption and the calamity that has befallen me, for sure I am that you have heard it and know it. Wherefore, with all possible humility, I crave your pardon of my fault, to wit, that without your knowledge I took for my husband him that pleased me best. And this I crave, not that my life may be spared, but that I may die as your daughter, and not as your enemy." And so, weeping, she fell at his feet. Messer Negro, now an old man, and naturally kindly and affectionate, heard her not without tears, and weeping, raised her tenderly to her feet, saying, "Daughter mine, I had much liefer had it that thou hadst had a husband that I deemed a match for thee, and in that thou hadst taken one that pleased thee, I too had been pleased. But thy concealing thy choice from me is grievous to me, by reason of my distrust of me, and yet more so, seeing that thou hast lost him before I have known him. But as 'tis even so, to his remains be paid the honour which, while he lived for thy contentment, I had gladly done him as my son-in-law." Then, turning to his sons and kinsmen, he bade them order Galeotto's obsequies with all pomp and honourable circumstance. Meanwhile, the young man's kinsmen and kinswomen, having heard the news, had flocked thither, bringing with them almost all the rest of the folk, men and women alike, that were in the city. And so his body, resting on Andreola's cloth, and covered with her roses, was laid out in the middle of the courtyard, and there was mourned, not by her and his kinsfolk alone, but publicly, by well nigh all the women of the city, and not a few men, and shouldered by some of the noblest of the citizens, as it had been the remains of no plebeian but of a noble, was borne from the public yard to the tomb with exceeding great pomp. Some days afterwards, as the podestà continued to urge his suit, Messer Negro would have discussed the matter with his daughter, but, as she would hear none of it, and he was minded in this matter to defer to her wishes, she and her maid entered a religious house of great repute for sanctity, where in just esteem they lived long time thereafter. End of Day 4, the 6th story.
Seventh story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 4, the 7th story. Simone loves Pasquino. They are together in a garden. Pasquino rubs a leaf of sage against his teeth and dies. Simone is arrested, and, with intent to show the judge how Pasquino died, rubs one of the leaves of the same plant against her teeth, and likewise dies.
When Pamphilo had done with his story, the king, betraying no compassion for Androla, glancing at Emilia, signified to her his desire that she should now continue the sequence of narration. Emilia made no demur, and thus began.
Dear gossips, Pamphilo's story puts me upon telling you another, in no wise like thereto, save in this, that as Andreola lost her lover in a garden, so also did she of whom I am to speak, and, being arrested like Andreola, did also deliver herself from the court, albeit 'twas not by any vigour or firmness of mind, but by a sudden death. And as 'twas said among us a while ago, albeit love affects the mansions of the noble, he does not, therefore, disdain the dominion of the dwellings of the poor, nay, does there at times give proof of his might no less signal than when he makes him feared of the wealthiest as a most potent lord. Which, though not fully, will in some degree appear in my story, wherewith I am minded to return to our city, from which today's discourse, roving from matter to matter, and one part of the world to another, has carried us so far. Know then that no great while ago there dwelt in Florence a maid most fair, and for her rank debonair, she was but a poor man's daughter, whose name was Simone, and though she must needs win with her own hands the bread she ate, and maintain herself by spinning wool, yet was she not therefore of so poor a spirit but that she dared to give harbourage in her mind to Love, who for some time had sought to gain entrance there by means of the gracious deeds and words of a young man of her own order that went about distributing wool to spin for his master, a woolmonger. Love being thus, with a pleasant image of her beloved Pasquino, admitted into her soul, mightily did she yearn, albeit she hazarded no advance, and heaved 1,000 sighs fiercer than fire with every skein of yarn that she wound upon her spindle, while she called to mind who he was that had given her that wool to spin. Pasquino on his part became, meanwhile, very anxious that his master's wool should be well spun, and most particularly about that which Simone span, as if, indeed, it and it alone was to furnish forth the whole of the cloth. And so, what with the anxiety which the one evinced, and the gratification that it afforded to the other, it befell that, the one waxing unusually bold, and the other casting off not a little of her wonted shyness and reserve, they came to an understanding for their mutual solace, which proved so delightful to both that neither waited to be bidden by the other, but was rather which should be the first to make the overture. While thus they spent their days in an even tenor of delight, and ever grew more ardently enamoured of one another, Pasquino chanced to say to Simone that he wished of all things she would contrive how she might betake her to a garden, whither he would bring her, that there they might be more at their ease, and in greater security. Simona said that she was agreeable, and, having given her father to understand that she was minded to go to San Gallo for the pardoning, she hied her with one of her gossips, Lagina by name, to the garden of which Pasquino had told her. Here she found Pasquino awaiting her with a friend, one Puccino, otherwise Stramba. And Stramba and Lagina falling at once to love-making, Pasquino and Simona left a part of the garden to them, and withdrew to another part for their own solace. Now there was in their part of the garden a very fine and lovely sage-bush, at foot of which they sat them down and made merry together a great while, and talked much of a junketing they meant to have in the garden quite at their ease. By and by Pasquino, turning to the great sage-bush, plucked therefrom a leaf, and fell to rubbing his teeth and gums therewith, saying that sage was an excellent detergent of aught that remained upon them after a meal. Having done so, he returned to the topic of the junketing of which he had spoken before. But he had not pursued it far before his countenance entirely changed, and forthwith he lost sight and speech, and shortly after died. Whereupon Simona fell a-weeping and shrieking, and calling Stramba and Lagina, who, notwithstanding they came up with all speed, found Pasquino not only dead, but already swollen from head to foot, and covered with black spots both on the face and on the body. Whereupon Stramba broke forth with, "Ah, wicked woman, thou hast poisoned him," and made such a din that was heard by not a few that dwelt hard by the garden, who also hasted to the spot, and seeing Pasquino dead and swollen, and hearing Stramba bewail himself, and accuse Simona of having maliciously poisoned him, while she, all but beside herself for grief to be thus suddenly bereft of her lover, knew not how to defend herself, did all with one accord surmise that 'twas even as Stramba said. Wherefore they laid hands on her, and brought her, still weeping bitterly, to the palace of the Podesta, where at the instant suit of Stramba, backed by Atticciato and Malagevole, two other newly arrived friends of Pasquino, a judge forthwith addressed himself to question her of the matter, and being unable to discover that she had used any wicked practice, or was guilty, he resolved to take her with him and go see the corpse, and the place, and the manner of the death, as she had recounted it to him, for by her words he could not well understand it. So, taking care that there should be no disturbance, he had her brought to the place where Pasquino's corpse lay swollen like a tun, whither he himself presently came, and marvelling as he examined the corpse, asked her how the death had come about. Whereupon, standing by the sage-bush, she told him all that had happened, and that he might perfectly apprehend the occasion of the death, she did as Pasquino had done, plucked one of the leaves from the bush, and rubbed her teeth with it. Whereupon Stramba and Atticciato, and the rest of the friends and comrades of Pasquino, making in the presence of the judge open mock of what she said, as an idle and vain thing, and being more than ever instant to affirm her guilt, and to demand the fire as the sole condign penalty, the poor creature that, between grief for her lost lover and dread of the doom demanded by Stramba, stood mute and helpless, was stricken no less suddenly, and in the same manner, and for the same cause, to wit, that she had rubbed her teeth with the sage-leaf, as Pasquino, to the no small amazement of all that were present. O happy souls for whom one and the same day was the term of ardent love and earthly life! Happier still, if to the same bourne ye fared. Ay, and even yet more happy, if love there be in the other world, and there, even as here, ye love. But happiest of all Simona, so far as we, whom she has left behind, may judge, in that fortune brooked not that the witness of Stramba, Atticciato, and Malagevole, carders, perchance, or yet viler fellows, should bear down her innocence, but found a more seemly issue, and appointing her a like lot with her lover, gave her at once to clear herself from their foul accusation, and to follow whither the soul that she so loved of her Pasquino had preceded her. The judge, and all else that witnessed the event, remained long time in a sort of stupefaction, knowing not what to say of it. But at length recovering his wits, the judge said, "'Twould seem that this sage is poisonous, which the sage is not used to be. Let it be cut down to the roots and burned, lest another suffer by it in like sort." Which the gardener, proceeding to do in the judge's presence, no sooner had he brought the great bush down, than the cause of the death of the two lovers plainly appeared. for underneath it was a toad of prodigious dimensions, from whose venomous breath, as they conjectured, the whole of the bush had contracted a poisonous quality. Around which toad, none venturing to approach it, they set a stout ring fence of faggots, and burned it together with the sage. So ended Master Judge's inquest on the death of hapless Pasquino, who, with his Simona, swollen as they were buried by Stramba, Aticiato, Guccio Umbratta, and Malagevole in the church of San Paolo, of which, as it so happened, they were parishioners. End of Day 4, the 7th story.
Day 4, the 8th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruth Golding. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 4, the 8th story. Girolamo loves Salvestra. Yielding to his mother's prayers, he goes to Paris. He returns to find Salvestra married. He enters her house by stealth, lays himself by her side, and dies. He is borne to the church, where Salvestra lays herself by his side, and dies.
When Emilius' story was done, Neifile, at a word from the king, thus began.
Some there are, noble ladies, who, methinks, deem themselves to be wiser than the rest of the world, and are, in fact, less so, and by consequence presume to measure their wit against not only the counsels of men, but the nature of things; which presumption has from time to time been the occasion of most grievous mishaps, but nought of good was ever seen to betide thereof. And as there is nought in nature that brooks to be schooled or thwarted so ill as love, the quality of which is such that it is more likely to die out of its own accord than to be done away of set purpose, I am minded to tell you a story of a lady, who, while she sought to be more wise than became her, and than she was, and indeed than the nature of the matter wherein she studied to show her wisdom allowed, thinking to unseat love from the heart that he had occupied, and wherein perchance the stars had established him, did in the end banish at one and the same time love and life from the frame of her son. Know then that, as 'tis related by them of old time, there was once in our city a very great and wealthy merchant, Leonardo Sigieri by name, who had by his lady a son named Girolamo, after whose birth he departed this life, leaving his affairs in meet and due order. And well and faithfully were they afterwards administered in the interest of the boy by his mother and guardians. As he grew up, consorting more frequently with the neighbours' children than any others of the quarter, he made friends with a girl of his own age that was the daughter of a tailor, and in course of time this friendship ripened into a love so great and vehement that Girolamo was ever ill at ease when he saw her not. Nor was her love for him a whit less strong than his for her. Which his mother perceiving would not seldom chide him therefore, and chastise him, and as Girolamo could not give it up, she confided her distress to his guardians, speaking, for by reason of her boy's great wealth she thought to make, as it were, an orange tree out of a bramble, on this wise: This boy of ours, who is now scarce 14 years old, is so in love with a daughter of one of our neighbours, a tailor, Salvestra is the girl's name, that if we part them not, he will peradventure, none else witting, take her to wife some day, and I shall never be happy again. Or if he see her married to another, he will pine away. To prevent which, methinks you could do well to send him away to distant parts on the affairs of the shop. For so, being out of sight, she will come at length to be out of mind, and then we can give him some well-born girl to wife. Whereto the guardians answered that 'twas well said, and that it should be so done to the best of their power. So they called the boy into the shop, and one of them began talking to him very affectionately on this wise: "My son, thou art now almost grown up. 'Twere well thou shouldst now begin to learn something for thyself of thy own affairs. Wherefore we should be very well pleased if thou wert to go stay at Paris a while, where thou wilt see how we trade with not a little of thy wealth, besides which thou wilt there become a much better, finer, and more complete gentleman than thou couldst here. And when thou hast seen the lords and barons and seigneurs that there are in plenty, and hast acquired their manners, thou canst return hither." The boy listened attentively, and then answered shortly that he would have none of it, for he supposed he might remain at Florence as well as another. Whereupon the worthy men plied him with fresh argument, but were unable to elicit other answer from him, and told his mother so. Whereat she was mightily incensed, and gave him a great scolding, not for his refusing to go to Paris, but for his love; which done, she plied him with soft wheedling words, and endearing expressions, and gentle entreaties, that he would be pleased to do as his guardians would have him. Whereby at length she prevailed so far that he consented to go to Paris for a year and no more, and so 'twas arranged. To Paris accordingly our ardent lover went, and there under one pretext or another was kept for 2 years. He returned more in love than ever, to find his Salvestra married to a good youth that was a tent maker. Whereat his mortification knew no bounds. But seeing that what must be, he sought to compose his mind, and having got to know where she lived, he took to crossing her path, according to the wont of young men in love, thinking that she could no more have forgotten him than he her. 'Twas otherwise, however. She remembered him no more than if she had never seen him; or if she had any recollection of him, she dissembled it, whereof the young man was very soon ware to his extreme sorrow. Nevertheless he did all that he could to recall himself to her mind, but as thereby he seemed to be nothing advantaged, he made up his mind, though he should die for it, to speak to her himself. So, being instructed as to her house by a neighbour, he entered it privily one evening, when she and her husband were gone to spend the earlier hours with some neighbours, and hid himself in her room behind some tent cloths that were stretched there, and waited till they were come back and gone to bed, and he knew the husband to be asleep. Whereupon he got him to the place where he had seen Salvestra lie down, and said, as he gently laid his hand upon her bosom, "O my soul, art thou yet asleep?" The girl was awake, and was on the point of uttering a cry, when he forestalled her, saying, "Hush, for God's sake, I am thy Girolamo." Whereupon she, trembling in every limb, "Nay, but for God's sake, Girolamo, be gone. 'Tis past the time of our childhood, when our love was excusable. Thou seest I am married, wherefore 'tis no longer seemly that I should care for any other man than my husband. And so by the one God I pray thee be gone, for if my husband were to know that thou art here, the least evil that could ensue would be that I should never more be able to live with him in peace or comfort, whereas, having his love, I now pass my days with him in tranquil happiness." Which speech caused the young man grievous distress, but 'twas in vain that he reminded her of the past, and of his love that distance had not impaired, and therewith mingled many a prayer and the mightiest protestations. Wherefore, yearning for death, he besought her at last that she would suffer him to lie a while beside her, till he got some heat, for he was chilled through and through, waiting for her, and promised her that he would say never a word to her, nor touch her, and that as soon as he was a little warmed he would go away. On which terms Salvestra, being not without pity for him, granted his request. So the young man lay down beside her, and touched her not. but gathering up into one thought the love he had so long borne her, the harshness with which she now requited it, and his ruined hopes, resolved to live no longer, and in a convulsion, without a word and with fists clenched, expired by her side. After a while the girl, marvelling at his continence, and fearing lest her husband should awake, broke silence, saying, "Nay, but Girolamo, why goest thou not?" But receiving no answer, she supposed that he slept. Wherefore, reaching forth her hand to arouse him, she touched him, and found him to her great surprise cold as ice. And touching him again and again somewhat rudely, and still finding that he did not stir, she knew that he was dead. Her grief was boundless, and 'twas long before she could bethink her how to act. But at last she resolved to sound her husband's mind as to what should be done in such a case, without disclosing that 'twas his own. So she awakened him, and told him how he was then bested, as if it were the affair of another, and then asked him, if such a thing happened to her, what course he would take. The good man answered that he should deem it best to take the dead man privily home, and there leave him, bearing no grudge against the lady, who seemed to have done no wrong. "And even so," said his wife, "it is for us to do." And taking his hand she laid it on the corpse, whereat he started up in consternation and struck a light, and without further parley with his wife, clapped the dead man's clothes upon him, and forthwith, confident in his own innocence, raised him on his shoulders and bore him to the door of his house, where he set him down and left him. Day came, and the dead man being found before his own door, there was a great stir made, particularly by his mother. The body was examined with all care from head to foot, and no wound or trace of violence being found on it, the physicians were on the whole of opinion that, as the fact was, the man had died of grief. So the corpse was borne to a church, and thither came the sorrowing mother and other ladies, her kinswomen and neighbours, and began to wail and mourn over it without restraint, after our Florentine fashion. And when the wailing had reached its height, the good man in whose house the death had occurred said to Salvestra, "Go wrap a mantle about thy head, and hie thee to the church, whither Girolamo has been taken, and go about among the women and list what they say of this matter, and I will do the like among the men, that we may hear if aught be said to our disadvantage." The girl assented, for with tardy tenderness she now yearned to look on him dead, whom living she would not solace with a single kiss, and so to the church she went. Ah, how marvellous to whoso ponders it is the might of love, and how unsearchable his ways! That heart, which, while fortune smiled on Girolamo, had remained sealed to him, opened to him now that he was fordone, and kindling anew with all its old flame, melted with such compassion that no sooner saw she his dead face, as she there stood wrapped in her mantle, than, edging her way forward through the crowd of women, she stayed not till she was beside the corpse, and there, uttering a piercing shriek, she threw herself upon the dead youth, and as her face met his, and before she might drench it with her tears, grief that had reft life from him had even so reft it from her. The women strove to comfort her, and bade her raise herself a little, for as yet they knew her not. Then, as she did not arise, they would have helped her, but found her stiff and stark, and so, raising her up, they in one and the same moment saw her to be Salvestra, and dead. Whereat all the women that were there, overborne by a redoubled pity, broke forth in wailing new and louder far than before. From the church the bruit spread itself among the men, and reached the ears of Salvestra's husband, who, deaf to all that offered comfort or consolation, wept a long while. After which he told to not a few that were there what had passed in the night between the youth and his wife. And so 'twas known of all how they came to die, to the common sorrow of all. So they took the dead girl, and arrayed her as they are wont to array the dead, and laid her on the same bed beside the youth, and long time they mourned her. Then they were both buried in the same tomb, and thus those whom love had not been able to wed in life were wedded by death in indissoluble union. End of Day 4, the 8th story. Recording by Ruth Golding.